And so when I emerged, I was ready to accept, that award, here's your life back, we'll just reset the clock. And then that didn't really happen, and I spent a couple years kind of banging my head against that wall of where's my normal. And
Hey, I'm Ryan Holmes, and this is Untold Santa Cruz, Shelter in Peace. There seems to be a lot in life that is beyond our control. And when we focus on that, it even seems to expand. It's through stories of perseverance, great spirit, and contribution that we learn how to be and who we can be in trying times and everyday moments. Untold Santa Cruz is a podcast about good people doing good work in a good place. It could be anywhere. It just happens to be here. My next guest created the resource she needed but couldn't find for women like her who were, quote, too young for breast cancer. I want to be clear that my mission is to help people like April find people like April. Breast cancer touched my life when my mom was diagnosed as I started junior high school and she was too young, which is somewhat more of a state of mind, a season of life, rather than a hard number. So this story is absolutely for young breast cancer patients and those that know and care for them. However, I also want to share her story, her process birthed out of the scorched earth of cancer and the whole new world in front of her at that time. We can all learn from this journey that April embarked on when she realized that her old normal wasn't coming back, despite all the yearning she and others could have for it to do so. She noticed how alone she felt being outside the normal demographic of breast cancer fighters when she was diagnosed at 34, shortly after having a child. Instead of grasping for what once was, she built the community she wanted and needed for herself and other young women in her situation, starting with Wildfire magazine and spreading to much, much more. Please welcome my friend, April Stearns. Hey, April.
Hey, Ryan.
Welcome to Untold Santa Cruz. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. I've known you for a while and I've wanted to interview you for a while, but in getting ready for this interview, I've looked at your Instagram, your LinkedIn page, and looked through the magazine, and I'm kind of in awe of what you've built in Wildfire magazine. Can you tell me who the magazine is for and kind of how it was born?
Yeah, absolutely. So Wildfire magazine is my contribution, my answer, my response to the fact that I had breast cancer at 35. And when I was diagnosed, I was the only person in my family, in my colleague group, my social group, and also at the doctor's office. I was the only younger person with breast cancer. And all of the resources that I was being directed to and being handed were designed for the woman who is the median age, which is more like 65 in our country. And so there was a disconnect for me. I didn't see myself in those guidances and guidelines. And nor could my doctor really say, well, I have this other patient who is also 35 or any of those things. We were all in uncharted waters at that point. I was diagnosed in 2012. And so now I think there are, unfortunately, more and more of us being diagnosed young. And
all right. So I love the name Wildfire, and I read the story of it, but I want to hear it in your words because I think it's just perfect for right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So Wildfire, the name comes from the fact that I grew up with a firefighter family. My dad was a firefighter. My brothers were firefighters. And so growing up in that culture, there was a fear of fire, obviously, but there was also some respect for what a fire is all about. And so I grew up with this notion of a wildfire blazing through a forest and seeming to cause a lot of destruction and rightly causing a lot of destruction. Yeah. But then the story of kind of what happens to the forest after the fire always appealed to me as far as an analogy, because that fire, that clarifying event comes through, burns out the underbrush, and makes way for new life coming up and emerging. And maybe in some cases it can be even better than what was before. So when I made Wildfire magazine, first I wanted to pay homage to my dad. He had passed from pancreatic cancer just before I started the magazine. So I wanted to give a nod to him and his guidance in my life, but also to set the tone for the magazine that cancer was a wildfire for us, and it was horrible and it was destructive, but that maybe there was something to be nurtured and something coming after that we could explore together. Yeah. So that's the idea. Yeah.
That's a beautifully powerful perspective. And I mean, I've had that thought with this new normal we're in with COVID-19, is that, you know, everyone's collective normal is gone. And you know, sometimes it feels naive to hope for something better to come from the other side of this, but it seems better than the alternatives. How did you, with your diagnosis, stay so seemingly positive and even creative in the moment? I mean, you said that there were no resources for women like you, and you somehow chose to create it. How did you do that?
So it was definitely a road, you know, and I really think that through any big thing, whether it's COVID-19 and where we're at now, or something like a breast cancer diagnosis, it is a lot of ups and downs and a lot of grieving, grieving what could have been, what has happened, the life that we knew before being lost. And you work through all of those things. And sometimes it's a swift process. You know, you go from the thing happening to the acceptance and you move on and you're rolling with it. And sometimes it's a much more up, down, back, forth squiggle line. And for me, my breast cancer road was much more of that up, down, back, forth squiggle line. And so it looks like now, like I was diagnosed and then created this magazine, and it was pretty swift, but it was actually a couple years. It was 4 years actually after my diagnosis before the first issue came out. And in that time, there's a story that you get told when something major happens. And we've heard a little of this with COVID, but not so much. But basically that this terrible thing is happening to you, but before you know it, you'll be back to normal. You'll get back to what that life was before. And in breast cancer, there is that story that's told too. You know, this diagnosis this is a little speed bump. You're going to do your treatment, you know, might be chemo, might be surgery, might be radiation. Some women take hormone therapies for a few years. But the overall umbrella is that your life's going to go back to normal. So just hang in, you know, one foot in front of the other. And so I really believed that. And I really didn't have a lot of trouble going through treatment. It was hard, but I appreciated that my oncologist laid out the path. And I am if nothing, a good follower of instructions. And so I just did the work, you know, and got through it. My treatment was about 13 months long. And so when I emerged, I was ready to accept, you know, that award, here's your life back, you know, we'll just reset the clock. And then that didn't really happen, you know, and I spent a couple years kind of banging my head against that wall of where's my normal. And finally came around to the idea, okay, it's going to be a new normal, and I'm going to have to figure out what this new normal is. And that's where the magazine started to emerge from needing to find others who had gone through what I had gone through, needing to see how they were making a life after diagnosis, but not finding those stories, not seeing those images, and then the slow reluctance of, okay, I guess I need to make that resource.
Reluctant, so, yeah. I bet. I'll have to build it if I want it.
Exactly. Yeah. Right.
And want it for others, right?
Well, yes, that's exactly true. I mean, it started off as a selfish thing of like, I really need to see these women, and then became, okay, if I need this, then I know there's others who need it. And very soon I started to hear that from all around me, as I found them, people saying, I thought I was the only one. And now I know I'm not.
Yeah. Yeah. And, being, as you said, too young for breast cancer, you're even more alone than, people or women with breast cancer.
Right.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, that's totally true. I think that the last statistic I saw was in the United States. There's, I think, close to 13,000 women diagnosed with breast cancer under the age of 40, which sounds like a lot. But if you consider those as all little grains of rice and you fling them to the far corners of our country, it is possible that you're the only person in your town or certainly at your work or in your family or in your social circle. And it really is hard to go through something like that when you don't have another friend you can call up and say, how did you tell your kid about cancer, or what did you do about these hot flashes? Or, we're such social creatures. We really need people we can talk to about this stuff.
Yeah, I remember, my mom got cancer in the 80s when I was in junior high, and I don't remember being sad, although I remember, or scared even, and that sounds weird because in the 80s when you heard someone had cancer, you thought they were going to die. But, my mom caught it early and had a good doctor, thankfully. But I remember her saying that the hardest part for her was how her social life changed, how people didn't know how to talk to her about it and they just stopped calling, So I was, this idea that telling our story makes everyone else safer. I love that.
Right.
Yeah. So have you always been a storyteller, or is this something you've learned along the way?
It's interesting. I have, for the most part, always been a writer of my own story, but not necessarily to share. I've had journals and things like that from way back. I remember writing in journals as a teen, and needing that outlet for the injustices and different things that were happening in my life. And then later I discovered the power of telling stories for others to read. In my early writing career at newspapers and things like that, learning kind of the transformative power of sharing those stories. As far as like my own storytelling for like a personal narrative type storytelling, I think I got my start with that more when my daughter was born, and I had a blog at that point and was again searching for others who had younger children at home who could relate to what I was going through, just, on a parenting note. Yeah. And then pretty quickly that grew into a cancer blog, which was for the purpose of me having an outlet, but also to keep friends and family updated on what I was going through. So they wouldn't have to be asking my husband necessarily or wondering, how I was. Because like you said, too, with your mom, there were people who didn't want to bother me or didn't know what to say or didn't know how to support me. So for me, having a blog to kind of say, this is what I'm going through, that they could read, without being right in front of my face, and they could digest and then come back to me with their support later, seemed to kind of help everyone just kind of stomach what was going on too. Yeah. So that was powerful for me to learn that.
We hear cancer and it's sort of this blanket, it's a blanket diagnosis, but I was really struck by reading through the sample magazine you have on the website that there are so many experiences of breast cancer, just so many different expressions of it, different ways that it's treated and even preemptive treatment. I was reading about the, genetic analysis. Everyone has their own experience with it, I suppose. And I guess Wildfire is a place to share all those experiences and the collective reality. Right,
exactly. When I started it, I wasn't, trying to be the voice of young breast cancer, or trying to say that my way of going through it was, the right way or the only way by any means. What I didn't know when I was diagnosed was that there are several different types of breast cancer. There are several different stages at which you can be diagnosed. Sure. And then there's all the little decisions and choices to be made throughout treatment. And all these roads are leading you in kind of a slightly different place where you end up. And we all have this breast cancer diagnosis in common, but it's helpful to find other women who have made some of the similar choices or ended up with some of the similar results as a consequence of those choices. And so I just wanted to make a space where it was possible to find those people.
Yeah. Yeah. So one of my favorite parts of your story, it seems like a tiny part, and it's in the beginning, but I see it playing out here. When you were writing at City on the Hill, and you were, I was snooping. When you're writing at City on the Hill, yeah, it was really fun. I mean, I wrote down way more questions than we'll have time for, just because so many. I was so curious, but you had your first story to write and you didn't know how to do it and you wanted to do it. So you started researching and found a story you liked, and then you deconstructed that. And I mean, it seems so obvious, but it's just brilliant to me. And it sort of seems like that's what your magazine's doing. You're deconstructing this experience, this difficult road. But also, this road of possibility too. So providing role models, and here's how you can do it when it might look like this for you.
Exactly. I think, we all kind of have to start wherever we are and from whatever tools we have. And I think two things, one is just, start now, you can start again at any time, but just begin whatever your process is now, whether you feel like you're ready or not. But yeah, look for those people who can show you a little bit of a path, that you want to emulate. It's a little of that fake it till you make it, right? Like you find someone who's doing something, whether it's survivorship or, writing an article or making a magazine, whatever it is, making a podcast. You find those ones that you think, okay, they're doing that really well. Like, how are they doing that? And you take it apart, and then it is usually a little series of blocks or paths that you can follow until it becomes apparent that you need to diverge and make it your own. But by then, I know I'm picturing, children learning to ride bicycles with training wheels. Like no one expects you to be just, a BMX bike rider flying off jumps and stuff right on your first day. You have to start somewhere. So
And it strikes, obviously in nature, diversity is strong. And if there's only one message out there in the world of this is how to be a breast cancer survivor, this is what it looks like, and you're not on that path that day, that I imagine that seems really alienating, or you feel alone again.
Oh, exactly. And for whatever reason, there is kind of that like classic breast cancer survivor trope in our society. You've seen them in the movies, you see them every October, when everything goes really pink, you see them. And it's not to say we don't have those days where we feel like that, breast cancer warrior girl, who's really doing it strong, and it's like, I've got this and all that. But unfortunately, if, like you said, if that's the only message or the only language can be that of war and winning and all of that, then what about the days when you don't feel like you're winning at it, or you feel sad or mad or sick as a dog, or you've lost someone, as we build these connections and know so many people, in whether it's the breast cancer community or whatever community is your own, you inevitably lose people there too. And so then how do you reconcile that with the, you've got this girl kind of message of cancer too? So it's making space for all those different stories to come out, because I will guarantee that, if you're feeling sad, there's someone else who also has felt sad and needs to know that that's valid.
Yeah. Why do you think we have such a propensity to simplify the archetype of the breast cancer survivor? And I don't know if we're doing it consciously, but this singular image that we have, why do you think that is? I mean, because we all know someone that's been affected. I mean, I think we all do. And certainly we all look different, all our friends and family.
Right. I think, as humans, we really like a story of triumph and a story of overcoming. And it's probably just really scary to acknowledge the fact that things can go all different ways. I mean, even as COVID's playing out and we're hearing those stories of people dying, I do find myself kind of appreciating hearing that someone overcame it or is recovering, and you want to feel like, okay, well, if that happens to me, then I will be that person. Or if that happens to my loved one, that'll be that person. And everyone wants to know what to say to someone who's going through something hard. And it feels good to be able to say, you've got this, you can do this, and I think there's room for that language. I think it just also has to be inclusive of the fact that somewhere between you've got this and where you are today, there might be a lot of different things happening in between, and that those are okay too.
Yeah.
And I think, as humans, I see us getting better at that and getting better at talking about particularly the mental health side of a physical diagnosis. But that's the messy stuff. That's the hard stuff. And sometimes I think as a society, we just kind of would rather wrap it all up and put a pink bow on it and get on with it,
Yeah. I keep thinking that, that there's some positive to humanity, going through something as radical as COVID, together. We are unified in this one thing. It's fear. And, I think some of us are fearing different things. Some are fearing the virus. Some are fearing the economics. I mean, we're all probably deep down fearing the virus, even if we're hoping or thinking that it's overplayed or less, hopefully going to turn out smaller effects. But, is there, I mean, that must be quite a community. I mean, the community you've built through Wildfire, strikes me as, you started with a magazine, but you've ended up with a wonderful Instagram, account. I mean, it's full of positive things. And then I read through the comments and I'm like, wow, it reminds me of like, these are people with heavy stories and lives changed. How is that for you, building this community and dealing with all this heaviness? And I guess triumph too, but yeah.
Sure. Well, it's interesting because when I decided to make the magazine, I remember having a conversation with my therapist where I don't remember, word for word, but the message from her was, are you sure? Like, do you want to stay in cancer? Because, at the point that I actually launched the first issue, I was 4 years out from my diagnosis. I had lost my dad in between. A lot of stuff had transpired, and, everyone was still kind of rooting for me to get back to normal. And so then my acknowledgement that I was going to have to make a new normal, and my decision to have that new normal encompass cancer or kind of stay in cancer. I think some people felt like, is this the right decision? And I have not regretted it at all, because even though I've heard so many hard stories, like I said, there's so many different stories of being diagnosed. There's not one story. And even though I've definitely lost women that I've become close to through Wildfire and through being part of the community, I don't regret deciding to stay in this cancer land, because it does fill me up, and it gives me something back too that helps me also feel like I'm not alone. And I think that's the thing, no matter how much Wildfire grows and helps other people, selfishly, I'm still here needing my community too. As a breast cancer survivor myself, I still need to find those women and see how they're doing this. And I get to do that every day and call it my job. So it's pretty clever, actually, what I've done for myself.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. Keep creating the thing you need and crave and want, and lo and behold, there's good people there.
Right. Yeah.
What would you say? I mean, is there space in Wildfire for family members, dads, husbands, in that magazine? I mean, I know that it's for women with breast cancer, but I guess what I'm asking is, how do we support the family members, or how do we inform the family members that are going through this with their wives, their daughters,
Right. Well, it's a great question, because when I started the magazine, I really was only thinking about that patient, that young woman who I identified with. And then as the magazine grew, I had doctors, caregivers, nurse navigators reaching out to me because they're so hungry for resources to be able to give their young patients. And by the same token, I get a lot of family members reaching out, like you said, whether it's partners or parents. A lot of times parents, just because of it being a younger community,
right.
And there's parents who are struggling to support this huge thing that has happened to their child, their daughter.
Yeah.
And then I also have women who reach out to me who are like, my best friend is now going through this, or, my sister-in-law or my cousin or whatever. And so although Wildfire is written and told from the perspective of other patients, it has become a resource that is so valuable to everyone who is surrounding and holding that young woman in their life, because it gives you a glimpse into what they're going through and helps to shed light on the scarier side, the darker side that's not really portrayed in all the pamphlets you get from the doctor's office or the Hollywood blockbuster that, is about cancer, but it's so positive. So Wildfire is read by everyone around her too. And so, I've really struggled with do I need to have like different versions of the magazine for the different audiences that read it. But I've decided to keep it core to the young woman who's been diagnosed herself, because she truly is the one who really, really needs to find others.
Yeah.
But I like almost every day I hear from someone who is just one, ripple out from the center of that circle, who says, reading the magazine, it gives me a way of supporting this person that I love so much in my life, and gives me a glimpse of what they need.
That's great. It was interesting as I looked through it, like I completely get what you're saying. And I think, gosh, it would be really hard to start another magazine for people surrounding that person. But an interesting thing happened as I read it. I actually felt supported in the way that, how when a friend gets married and you meet the people in their life and you feel like, oh, my friends have great people around them. Well, reading the magazine, I had this feeling of like, these are the women that are going through this, with my mom, for instance. And that felt really good. Yeah. I don't know these people and they're having different experiences, but it was just nice to know, I guess, the support's there. So thank you for doing that. It was a really surprising result in the research,
That's great to hear. I love that.
Yeah. Another interesting thing that I didn't expect that you're doing, there's lots of interesting things you're doing that I didn't expect. One of my role models was always Mr. Rogers. And something he did habitually was write letters to people. And there's actually a whole book about about the relationship someone had with him through the letters. And that connection seems so profound. And like you said, with the magazine, you know, an opportunity to detach from the digital world and the pace of it. I see that you've started a pen pal club. I just wanted to find out more about that and how it's going.
Yeah. So when this whole COVID thing started, it's interesting because I also had Mr. Rogers, Fred Rogers in the back of my head, you know, and the advice he got from his mom to look for the helpers. And I was thinking to myself, you know, we all have this opportunity now. This is when, you know, this was early March when things were just kind of getting rolling here in California. But I thought, like, so who do I want to be in this crisis? And, you know, I've had a lot of ups and downs and squiggle lines around all of that now in the last, I don't know where we are now. I can't even remember how long we've been in our homes at this point, but, you know, lots of thoughts. But initially, one of the thoughts I had was, okay, so COVID isn't breast cancer, but it is something we're all dealing with now in this new normal. And how can I be a helper in that? Because I wanted to try to be a helper to my community. And so one thing I thought, so I saw this funny meme about early on about how you can't call quarantine unless you're from the quarantine region of France. Otherwise it's just sparkling isolation, right? And so I thought, like, how can I make someone's isolation a little more sparkling? And yeah, this idea of letter writing, you know, we're all in our homes. We maybe have a lot more time on our hands than we had before. So how can we sparkle that up for someone? And so I just put out there on the Instagram, you know, does anyone want to be linked up with a pen pal? And Brian, the response was just huge. I think now played matchmaker to 60 women who reached out to me. Yeah. And said, that sounds amazing. I really want to do that. And so what I did was I asked them, so, you know, everyone who follows me, or for the most part, everyone who follows me on Instagram has had breast cancer at a younger age, or at least identifies, you know, with a younger crowd. And so I asked all of them how old they were currently, you know, how old they were at their diagnosis, and if they had any children. And I just used that as my jumping off point for linking them together. And I figured, you know, if you have kids around the same age and you're around the same age dealing with your breast cancer, let that be the foundation that starts your friendship, and then you'll have to just see where it goes from there. But it was really fun getting to play that matchmaker, and I've had such a great response from people being so excited about doing it. I sent out a few little pointers, you know, stationery always makes writing fun. So I had some links for where I find my stationery, cool. And having some fun stamps, you know, here's a link to that. But the responses came from all over the world, all over the US, especially, but also from Canada, England, Australia, just from all over the place. And so it was really fun matching women up with that.
That's so fun. That's so fun. Yeah. You seem to be an expert at starting things and just getting them going and then letting them blossom into something. And it's just, you know, like the wildfire, right? This is just a moment where nothing's normal. You have some time to start things. And I just, you know, beyond the cancer support, I just appreciate you being a model for doing that in the world, because I you know, I struggle with it. You know, I struggle with especially something vulnerable, something creative. It's really hard to start. So thanks for doing that. And then linking up people, starting those relationships, you know?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, I think, you know, early on in Wildfire, I got some good advice to just start before you're ready. And, at that point, I was looking at other magazines and other entrepreneurs, and I just heard that message a few times to start before I was ready. And I even remember my own dad saying that to me as part of his advice for getting married, because I was, you know, I was feeling like, well, I have too much debt, or I have this and that and the other thing, and should I really get married? And I just remember him saying, you know, if you wait till all the pieces line up perfectly, then probably you'll never do whatever it is. And that was certainly the case with starting the magazine. And even now, there's been a few things that I've decided to tackle within our, within the COVID environment that we're in, that were things on my business model plan or whatever, you know, down the road. And I just thought, you know what, let's just jump in, let's just do it. And we'll just see what happens. And, you know, people are really forgiving of that kind of just DIY spirit. You know, if you just come at it and are like, I don't know what I'm doing, let's see what happens. They get really excited about that, and they want to support you doing that. So.
Well, you can't say that you're doing things and not tell us what you're doing. What do you got up your sleeve?
Well, two things. So I had always wanted to do more writing workshops with women to help them tell their stories. And I really love writing in person. And so I have kind of been pushing that off because I wanted to figure out how to do more in-person things. And I've had the opportunity to do several in-person workshops, but whenever I put out an in-person workshop, I would inevitably get people saying like, oh, bummer, you know, I'm in Florida or whatever. I wish I was closer. And so I decided that this was a really great opportunity to do more online workshops. And so I just immediately launched one for April, and now I have another one for May. And it's just been really great to just jump in and figure out how to do a Zoom-based writing workshop, which I hadn't done before. Yeah. And then the other thing is, it's kind of a similar thing. I'd wanted to do more live events around launching each issue of the magazine, where I would have contributors read their stories and just, you know, get excited and honor them for their contribution to the current magazine. And again, I just kept pushing it off because, I don't know, you know, stuff happens and it just becomes a backburnered thing. Well, I just decided, you know, now's the time, and we're all so open to doing things online these days that I just decided I would do a launch party for my current issue. Also, you know, just by online connection, and people are excited and people want to do it. So yeah, those are two things that are coming.
I love it. I love it. So that reminded me of something else. Well, so with writing, right? If you plan on becoming a writer, you know, it won't happen, right? Because it's uncomfortable. It's difficult. I mean, some people do it. They obviously have done it. There are writers. But if you have a workshop and you're signed up for the workshop and there's other people that are going to be there expecting you, you know, it's this constraint almost. It's like, well, now it's on my schedule. So it seems like, in a way, a lot of Wildfire and the things you're doing now have been born of constraint, you know, the possibility of normal life, pre-diagnosis or pre-COVID, or, you know, so that's such a wonderful skill to share as well. This, taking what seems like a constraint and then finding a creativity in it, and a sort of like, well, you know, what do I have to lose, I guess? I mean, I might as well start because, you know, I'm not going back to normal. Things are different.
Exactly. Well, and I really think too that one of our human superpowers is in adaptability and being able to pivot. I also think that pain is a really good guide, and it doesn't have to be like horrendous pain. It can just be, you know, I want to grow, or the skin is getting a little tight. Like, how can I shift and change? And when we allow ourselves to be open to that and hear, you know, that those things are happening in our lives, and then even if it's like guiding us in a direction that also feels uncomfortable because it's outside of our comfort zone. I mean, I can think of very few examples in my life where I've been like, oh, I wish I wouldn't have changed, or I wish I wouldn't have jumped. You know, we usually end up being like, why didn't I do that sooner? So, yeah.
It's like, you know, the the pain of the lost normal, what things used to be. That pain is really perspective, and that perspective creates a vision where we see things differently. We see different things. And then once you start, the perspective keeps changing because you're finding yourself in that new territory, right?
Well, that's totally true. I think there is a good long period of time, it's longer for some than others, where you try to bargain your way back to the way it used to be. And you're so upset and disappointed that it has changed, and you're trying to figure out how to Band-Aid it back together so it can be what it was before. But unfortunately, life rarely works out that way. And we do have to kind of build again or rise again from whatever those ashes were. But so many times it ends up being even better than you ever could have imagined. It's just getting yourself to that point where you're ready to take those steps in that acceptance direction versus the, bargaining and trying to go back direction.
Right. Yeah. The resisting how it is or what's so, right?
Right. Exactly. And sometimes it can be a cobbled together, mix of what was and what can be. But unfortunately, it rarely is exactly how it was before.
Yeah. I think you were referring to that earlier. You talked about the different stages of grief. I think you were referring to the stages of grief. And if you just try to rush to the end where it's all better, you miss a lot of that magic in the middle. Or, magic might be a little too rosy, right? Because it's hard too. And you seem to have a real respect for the hard.
Well, I do, because, it's interesting. I think this is along the same lines of like that cancer trope and the messages we get from society. And there's this desire to find the silver linings, and people refer to their cancer journey and things like that. And the reason that I resist that isn't because I don't think there are lessons to be learned or like I'm saying that it could maybe possibly even turn out better than you could have imagined, but it's just a desire to really pay respects to the struggle, because I think that when we don't do that, first of all, I don't even know if it's possible to skip that. I think you might think that you've somehow cheated and gone ahead to you've collected your $200 and you're on to the next thing or whatever, but life doesn't usually work out that way. Like you'll find yourself back at square one. It just might not be immediately. And so I've found it's better to just kind of work through the process as needed, but also there's so much richness of life in that struggle too, and in allowing yourself to feel your feelings, and it then opens you up to finding others who can relate to that, and there's a richness in those friendships too.
That's lovely. Is there anything that we haven't talked about that we should talk about?
My goodness, I'm sure there's many things.
Right.
But
we may have to have you back again.
Yeah. No, I think like the only thing that I was thinking while, we've mentioned COVID off and on is it is interesting the parallels between a cancer diagnosis and the treatments and what we're all facing as a world right now. And I know within the cancer community, there's some people who feel like it's kind of validating for the whole rest of the world to kind of know what that feels like. Even down to the quarantine, because, when you're going through cancer treatment, you do kind of have to shut yourself off from a lot of the rest of the world, just because you're very susceptible to illness and things, But then there's the fear of, what does all this mean? What if I, get COVID or in the breast cancer, what if my cancer comes back, and the fear of all of that unknown, it just feels very familiar territory. And so it's just an interesting time, to be publishing a cancer magazine in this greater context, But one of the things I did just this last week was I took a survey of my little community, to ask them, like, how can I support you and what else do you need, beyond the pen pals and the things we've talked about. And they mostly just said, please just be normal. Please just be a dependable place where I can get the breast cancer support I need. Because I think right now, all of the small businesses are trying to figure out how to serve their customers in this new light. And we really do need to ask each other, like, what do you need? How can I help you? How can I serve you? And I feel lucky that they said, just keep doing what you've been doing, because I know how to do that. So I'm just going to keep supporting with storytelling. But yeah.
That's great. I love your quote, telling your story makes the world safer and better for everyone.
Oh, yeah. Someone actually said that to me after I told a story from my past. And I really had to sit with that and think, like, is that true? Like, is telling my little story helping someone else? But then I think back in my life, and so many times it's like, if I had heard a story like that, if I could have known, a path or that I wasn't alone, it would have made the world better for me. So I strongly believe that.
Yeah. The added bonus I always think is that if you're willing to tell your story, that also gives people the message that it's okay to tell theirs.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I think that is one of the big things about the power of storytelling. It's both in the listening and in the telling your story. And it all has to do with that person who is witnessing you do that. Because it's so powerful to see someone stand up and say, this is my truth and this is where I've been. This is what I'm going through. And that's one of the things that I've really enjoyed about being a part of a younger breast cancer community, is because I don't think we have some of the same stigma around admitting that we have cancer, or admitting a major diagnosis. And, coupled with a desire to find others, people just are telling the most incredible life stories, and not because they want pity at all. Right. It's just to say, here I am, and these are my scars, and this is my story, and I'm still a whole person, And then you just keep repeating that until maybe you believe it too. Yeah. But
and it changes, right?
It does. It changes so much. Yes. Yeah.
Well, thank you for telling your story and starting Wildfire, even though you didn't know how. You certainly have learned well. Where can people, I'll link in the show notes to Wildfire. And
sure.
Where else can they find you? Where's the best place to find you and about the work you're doing?
Yeah. So the website is probably the best place. That's wildfirecommunity.org. But certainly there's vibrant discussions and things happening on Instagram. Yeah. That's wildfire_BC_magazine. I'm also on Facebook, but a great starting point is the website.
Perfect. It's all so beautiful. I mean, the magazine is beautiful. Your feed is beautiful. I just admire the lightness you bring to such a intense and heavy topic. You've done a really good job.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Thanks for being here today.
Absolutely. It's been my pleasure.
All right. Talk to you soon.
Okay.
I learned so much from the whole process of talking with April. I loved how she modeled her writing after something she knew she liked in the beginning. So many times when faced with the blank page, a space where nothing exists yet, we can become gripped by the notion of having too many options. Paralysis by analysis. Whenever we are overcome by emotion in life, it can be easy to freeze up and do nothing, giving in to resistance. Whether it's the fear of a new type of work assignment, the opportunity to be creative, or the life-shaking blow of something like a cancer diagnosis, having a model to follow is incredibly helpful. While we can all agree that it can certainly help, it's dangerous to think that it's the only option. There will be days when we lack energy, drive, and faith. We need a shoulder to lean on, or cry on, or a picture in our mind of what our path to the other side of pain can look like. Whether that is a role model or a system model or both, I was reminded by my talk with April that we don't need to walk alone through pain, sadness, or anger. There are people out there that have done it before and have something truly useful to share. In the case of women that are too young for breast cancer, it was incredibly hard to find those others. So hard, yet important, that April created a space to share those stories and lend those shoulders so no young women would feel they had to walk that path alone. If you know someone whose life has been impacted by breast cancer, whether that is someone who has it or knows and cares for that person, please share this episode, Wildfire Magazine, and the incredibly informative and supportive community that April has helped grow with her courage to jump in and create when she didn't know exactly how, but knew all about why. Thanks for listening. As always, if you know someone with a story like April's that simply must be told, I would love to meet them. Drop me an email at untoldsantacruz@gmail.com. See you next time. I'm Ryan Holmes.